Hey, today we're looking at unemployment, okay? And some of the things that we do here, we're also going to do in class. I'm going to talk about it in the video, but for those people who could not make class and are just watching it as a video, you want to look at several of these things yourself and actually understand what's going on there. Things like U3 and U6 unemployment, the labor force participation rate, you need to actually look those up and see what I'm talking about. Otherwise, it won't make any sense, okay? So for those of you that are not in class and not doing this stuff, you're going to need to do some Google searching and look at these things as we go. All right? So to start off with unemployment, we always think about unemployment as people who aren't working. But that's not a really good definition because little children don't work. You know, we don't have 2-year-olds and we're saying, hey, come on, get going, what are you doing? Some people are retired. They don't work because they don't want to work, you know. Some people are in jail. They can't work. So there's a lot of people out there that don't work, that could work, but for various reasons, they're not, okay? So you need to understand that the way the government has decided to define unemployment is something called U3. Now, if you go online, you're going to find there's a U1, which is the narrowest definition, and U2, and U3 is the standard that a lot of people like to quote. And so for U3, you need to be actively looking for work in the last 2 months. That means you need to have applied for a job, gone to a job interview. You need to be actively looking for work. And you can't get it. That's defined as U3. Now remember, there's all kinds of people that aren't working and don't even want to work. For 10 years, my wife was raising kids and she was a stay-at-home mom. And so she would not have been in the U3 definition. She was not counted as unemployed, even though she was unemployed, because she was not looking for work. And you have to be looking for work in the last 2 months and not find it. Okay? So that's kind of how they work that definition. Now, if you're thinking about this, you've already noticed a problem. What if the economy is so bad, or the person decides for whatever reason that they don't want to ever look for work? Do they count them as unemployed? No. So if you give up after a year of searching for work and just say, oh, what's the point? Then the unemployment rate actually goes down as people get discouraged and they just drop out of the workforce and they say, I don't care anymore. So you could, in the midst of a recession, depression, actually have some really good U3 numbers that don't necessarily make sense, all right? Also, you're going to find, well, we'll get to that in a minute. So there's a U4, there's a U5, there's a U6, which is one of the higher measures there. And what U6 counts is it also counts underemployed people. So it also lists them as a part of the problem. So I've got a master's degree in teaching. I've got a bachelor of science in agriculture and resource economics. I can do a lot of things. If I'm selling popcorn on the street corner, I am underemployed. All right? Delivering pizzas for Domino's, that would be underemployed. I could be working 40 hours a week delivering pizzas, but are we really getting an efficient outcome in that case? Because my credentials are much higher than what's needed for the job. So U6, as a broadest measure, also includes people who are underemployed. And so you need to take a look at those and understand the difference between those. Because the U3 numbers, they look rosy all the time. And that's what most government officials like to quote because it's always good. But if you go and type in the U6 rate, you're going to find it's a lot different, okay, especially in harder times. So I think the U3 rate right now is something like 5 or 6%, which looks, hey, pretty good. But the U6 rate is something like 15 or 18%. So that means a lot of people are working, but they could actually do a much higher paying job. They've just said, this economy is not so good and I'm taking whatever I can, and that's what they're doing, okay? So you need to understand those differences there. So I was going to say that when people run for president, the incumbent, the person who is president, always quotes this number. And the challenger always quotes this number. because they want to make them look bad. And as soon as they get in, then they go to quoting this number and say, hey, look, the economy is great, everything's fine, you know. So understand that both people could actually be telling you the truth, but they're using it in a way to convey a meaning that's different. All right, so someone will say the unemployment rate is this, and the other one will say the unemployment rate is that, and you're like, well, which one is it right? Well, they're using different numbers, okay? So that's a difference you need to understand. All right, a third thing we need to take a look at, before I move on, these two numbers, a great place to find them is on a website called Investopedia. It's quite the almanac of everything economics and investing. So Investopedia is a great place to go. Another place to go is the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Okay? BLS.gov, Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So yes, labor and the statistics on that, that's a great place to go. So you can go there if you need a reference for the essay, but that's part of what the essay is asking for, is some real world information to justify your essay. So Investopedia and BLS.gov, great places to go, okay? So a great measure that I like to look at is something called the labor force participation rate, all right? So what we have there is, this is the percentage of people working from the total who could work. So you take people 18 to 65, and that is considered the working ages in America. And then you look at the percentage of those people that are actually working, right? So we're excluding children, we're excluding everyone over 65 because most of them are retired. You will pick up some retirees in there, criminals, stay-at-home parents, and some other groups we're going to talk about in a minute, that are not working, okay? So it's not 100%, which you might expect, but it's not even close. For most of American history, it's been around 50 to 55%, okay? For most of American history, it's been around 50 to 55%. So think about that. Only about half of our eligible people that could work are actually working, all right? So you have to go back to the 1930s and 40s when they started keeping these statistics, because those are the time periods when macroeconomics sort of became a thing and governments started tabulating this data. So if 50% of the people worked, and that was steady through the 1950s into the early 1960s, you have to think about the social dynamics and what that meant. Usually for most families, that meant that there was two parents in the home and one of them worked and the other stayed home. Okay? So if you look at, TV shows like Leave It to Beaver in the 50s, of black and white, there's the mom cooking food and there's the dad drinking coffee, reading the paper, and then he goes off to work and she stays at home. That was sort of the, average family situation in America in the 1950s. Then a curious thing starts to happen in the late 60s, early 70s. You start to see a social changes, social revolution. So this is going to be civil rights, but also women's rights. And a lot of ladies are going out of the home to work. And so the labor force participation rate actually climbs quite a bit into the 60s and gets all the way up to 65, 66%, I think, at its high mark there. And that's going into the 80s and into the 90s. And so we see a much greater percentage of people working than we did before. So it went from one person working and one staying at home to, in a lot of cases, two people working and no one at home. Our GDP at that time, of course, climbed significantly because now we got more people working. So those stay-at-home parents, they were always contributing, but now they're contributing with something we measure versus something we weren't. So our GDP climbs quite a bit. And our labor force participation rate is like 65, 66%. It's a fairly high number compared to historical averages. Right around 2000, 2001, we start to see a decline in labor force participation rate. And it has been steadily trending downward, okay, for the last, I don't know, what is that, 2 decades. It's just had this slow tail off going back down. And a lot of people were sort of scratching their heads. They're like, what is going on here? And because I need this video for other people, I'll spoil it for you. It turns out that young men are the ones that are leaving the workforce the fastest. Okay? So that might surprise you, but men ages 18 to 34 is the group that is dropping out of the workforce. So you should Google it. We're going to do that in classroom. We'll look at some articles from the Wall Street Journal. The Atlantic is the one I'm going to focus on. It's got a very good graph on it and synopsis of what's going on. And I won't spoil it for you too much, but we'll see what those young men are actually doing, because they're not working. So women actually are the higher number in the workforce now. Young men especially are simply not part of that workforce, and there's various explanations, and I'll go over it in class. But yeah, check out the article on the Atlantic, young men not working, Wall Street Journal, young men not working, Time Magazine, New York Times. I mean, it's just, there's all kinds of data on this, that clearly we are seeing the demise of young men. They're not working, okay? So some social factors are going on there, and we're going to discuss that. All right. Other thing we need to understand, though, for your notes is the types of unemployment. And these are generalities, but that's what macroeconomics is. We're covering big, sweeping generalities. So the first type of unemployment is frictional. Frictional unemployment means you're between jobs. You got out of college and now you're looking for work. So you're unemployed, okay? You got out of high school, you're looking for work. You quit your job and now you're looking for work. So you're in this unemployed category. You're looking, all right? And that's pretty common. It's pretty normal. And in fact, a healthy unemployment, we actually should have unemployment, is 4 to 6%. So if you see an unemployment rating of 4 to 6%, that's doing pretty good, because those are people in all those categories I was talking about. Is this a stay-at-home mom whose kids are now gone off to school and now she's looking for work? Is this some guy who's doing the same? Stay-at-home parents like this. What is it? Okay? Students moving from college, moving between jobs. There's all kinds of reasons why you might not be employed. And so yeah, 4 to 6%. And so a lot of seasonal work is involved in this. Like if you are a ski instructor, okay, you definitely work the winter and not the summer. If you are a tax accountant, you might be working really hard for H&R Block, from December through April 15th when taxes are due, but then what are you doing after that, So there's a lot of jobs that are seasonal like that, and they cause frictional unemployment. And most people are okay with this as long as it stays pretty low. The next kind is structural unemployment. So the structure of how the economy works has changed, and people now don't fit in it like they used to, okay? Something has changed and they can't get into the economy and actually do this. A classic example would be logging. So loggers made really good money, even when I was growing up in the 80s, and then Bill Clinton closed the forests. The federal forests were closed in 1993, 94. Right in there, they just said no more logging, and it'll be very selective and very small. Okay, so what's a logger to do? It's not really a transferable skill. I mean, that one guy who gets to be in a Chainsaw Massacre movie, but what are you going to do if you have skills as a logger? And so the structure of the economy changed, and these people had no skills. Another one would be the aluminum plant in the Dalles. I don't know if you know this, but when I first moved here, we had this huge aluminum plant down at the port. And there were many people in the Dalles who worked there. But when the aluminum plant went out of business, when it closed, now you're an aluminum smelter. What are you going to do around the Dalles? Well, you either have to move to some other aluminum plant or maybe some iron steel recycling facility somewhere in the United States. Those are your skills. Or you have to get new skills. Because otherwise, you're just unemployed. You have no transferable skill. And so the structure has changed and you have to adapt to it. And if you remember way back to me talking about the price system in chapter 6, how that it moves faster than people can adapt. This is one of the things I'm talking about. The aluminum plant closes and now what are you going to do the next day? Well, you're going to have to get some new skills. And so that's usually going to take a year or two. And because of these kind of things happening in our modern economy, what has come about as a way to help with this is the community college system. So America has really latched onto the idea of community colleges being the place that you can go to learn new skills. And most community colleges will focus on specific skills, and then you can go to the one you want to get the skill you want. Here in the Dalles, we have wind farm technology programs at our community college. It's one of the few places you can do that, and then a lot of those people get those skills and go work on the wind farms east of town. So that's totally the goal of community colleges. If you go to Western Oregon, I think they've since become a university, but that is where the police academy is for policemen across the state of Oregon. I think Chemeketa Community College in Salem is where you go to get degrees and skills at EMTs, firefighting training. So you go to Chemeketa Community College in Salem to do that. So a lot of the community colleges have their own special focus that they provide people with skills. And so a lot of government programs also focus on this. Aluminum plant workers who were all laid off were then eligible for free community college classes so that they could enhance their skills and get a job somewhere else, so that their structural skills were not stuck here, but rather those people can be efficiently working now that they line up with our new structure. Okay? All right. The last one is cyclical unemployment, and this is the worst one. This is the one that most economists say, oh, this is bad, and central planners at the Federal Reserve, they're all upset, and most politicians just abhor this one, because when this happens, it is bad, bad, bad. Okay? And in the last 100 and so years, I mean, this has happened during the Great Depression. It happened during the 70s, which I think was our second worst depression. It happened during the GFC, the Great Financial Collapse of 2008, which I think was our third Great Depression in the last 100 years. And so what happened is that something cyclical happened. It's the business cycle. That's what this is referring to. And we'll talk about that more, but normally business cycles, they go in little waves like this. It looks like ripples on a pond. Businesses will overextend and then they'll get knocked back and overextend and get knocked back. And so they're coming and going based on their good and bad decisions. That's the business cycle. And it has ups and downs, but usually they're fairly small. For reasons we'll get into with fiscal and monetary policy, as many times as not, it is some central planning government, spawn thing that screws up, and then you get this huge run up, and then you get this huge crash. And we tend to focus on the crash and think that the run up is normal, but yeah, that's part of the problem. So if the business cycles are incredibly big, then you've got this big wave of greatness. You've also got this big trough of collapse. And when that happens, you lose jobs in all areas due to lack of demand. And this becomes, they call it a death spiral. Okay? Businesses aren't making enough sales, so they lay some people off. Well, those people now don't have money to buy anything, so the businesses aren't making sales, so they lay off more people, who have less purchasing power, so they lay off more people. So the business is closed, so they lay off more people, but they have no one to buy from, so they lay off more people. And this just spirals down until it reaches some base level at which the economy hits rock bottom, and then things sort of stagnate at that level, and then eventually things start to grow again. So that's what the business cycle is. But in those big spirals downwards, you have a loss of jobs in all areas. Okay? So we didn't have any less students in 2009, but we laid teachers off because the state of Oregon couldn't collect taxes, because there was no businesses doing business, because all the people had been laid off. You know, and so every industry, things that you wouldn't even think were affected, like teaching with a downturn, no, we had to lay people off because we had no money as well. So this affects all areas and all industries. There might be a few shining stars, but most of them are down. At the making of this video in 2020, you know, there's about 5 or 10 companies that are doing really well across the United States in the stock market. Microsoft, Google, you know, Peloton, because everyone's stuck in their home, Zoom, because everyone's gone to Zoom meetings. I mean, there's a few shining star stocks, but most of them are down. They're not really doing that well. Okay, so that is part of the cycle of how things work, and that's the one that a lot of people in charge like to watch out for, because they get voted out of office and they're kicked to the curb if this kind of stuff happens, because people don't tolerate that. All right, so that's unemployment. We're going to take a look at these in class. If you're not in class, you want to look up U3 unemployment rate, the U6, and see the difference there. Investopedia and Bureau of Labor and Statistics are really good options. We're also going to look at the labor participation rate, and then we're going to discuss why are young men not working. What is going on there? What social change has happened there? And it's going to have some huge ramifications, and it's also going to be kind of telling, like how are they able to live and able to eat when they're not working? Who's feeding them? So those are some of the questions we're going to talk about in class, and I'll see you there.